Welcome to Supersizing Bliss, the podcast, where I, Toby Witte, read from my book Supersizing Bliss, How We Have Betrayed Our Homes and the Happiness We Seek. In the chapter Two Planes, I described the Farnsworth house by Mies van der Rohe. We followed it up with a wonderful conversation with architectural historian Michelangelo Sabatino, who just published a new book on the same building. And then we chatted with Paige Clausen about modern and innovative architecture during the last century. In this episode, we'll round it off with a look at mid-century modern homes. George Smart is known as Mr. Modernism. He's the founder of NC Modernist and US Modernist, the world's largest non-profit educational archive dedicated to the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. George, what is NC Modernist and when and how did it all get started?
So NC Modernist has been around 18 years now, and it started one dark and stormy night in 2007 when I was thinking about getting a new house. And I'd always liked modernism. So I did what everyone does. You go to Google and you start getting ideas. And in the process of doing that, I found a couple of houses in Raleigh, North Carolina, where I grew up, that I had never seen before, that were amazing houses that had been destroyed just out of negligence. And I thought to myself, how could somebody possibly let this work of art go away and deteriorate and ultimately be bulldozed? So I made a list of the houses, and then I called some of my dad's friends. My dad was an architect. He had passed away by then. So he had these 70 and 80-year-old buddies that I called, and they said, "Oh, George, there are hundreds of these throughout Raleigh. If you come and pick me up, we'll drive around and go see them." So I would drive over to their houses in my little Mini Cooper, like the Italian Job, and get these old guys in the passenger seat with my iPhone hanging out the window, taking pictures of the houses all around Raleigh. It was a blast.
It does sound like a blast. So what did you discover? What did you find? So did you record 100 houses? What did you
Well, we
get into?
got about 50 or so houses on a list. And then about that time, I showed that to a few people and they said, well, this should really be a website. So I went online and got a free website. And I thought, okay, well, what the hell? I'll just throw them on there and it'll be a website for me. And it turned out not so much. Everybody glommed onto this thing. And pretty soon it had a small cult following in Raleigh, and people wanted to have tours of the houses. So in 2008, we had our first tour. 250 people showed up. And then from there, it's just taken off. And we've done about 170 tours since then.
Wow, that's impressive. Did you then go about deliberately looking for more houses? How did that then sort of develop into what it is today? And can you describe briefly sort of what people will find on NC Modernist as well? This also turned into US Modernist at some point.
Later on, yes.
Yeah.
Once those 50 houses were up, everybody knew another house somewhere, and they would send them in, and we would add them. So it grew and grew and grew and grew. As of right now, we have 5,000 houses across North Carolina. Virtually every modernist house, old and new, that has ever been built, we have tracked in some way and have documentation on most of the architects for all these projects. NC Modernist came about in 2013, and then we went national in 2015 with US Modernist, which was to do for the country what we were doing for the state. And on the US Modernist site, we've tracked 23,000 houses by all the major architects of the 20th century era and the 21st century. And people can go on there and discover an incredible amount of information about the houses, plus other features like our magazine library and our podcast.
That is absolutely fascinating. Before I ask you about the podcast, what kind of feedback have you seen? I assume that you've brought awareness to the building stock in North Carolina and US wide. Have you had people tell you about the story of their own homes, maybe homes that have been saved from the wrecking balls, anything like that?
Oh, hundreds of those stories. I mean, we're doing this for a reason. And the reason is that when a house, particularly an older house, goes through 5 or 6 owners, and it's a modernist house. It's that weird house down the street, right? People forget. They don't know its history, the owners, the original owners, who the builder was, who the architect was. So when it comes time to sell here in 2024, 2025, the realtor that they hire has no clue. But because of us, they do. They can type in that address into our site and get the whole history of both that architect and all the houses that he or she ever did and that house. And that has resulted in the sale of probably 400 or 500 houses that possibly would have been bulldozed otherwise because people were able to find out about them. We know that we've helped save about a dozen, maybe 15 directly by intervening in the demolition process and helping people find new options.
That actually happened to me just now. There's a house down the road from where I design and build my own home in Concord, North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
So good way from Raleigh. And I remember we were talking several years back, and you said, Toby, there's a mid-century modern house down the road from you, and I was adamant there wasn't. I have no, so I've been up and down that road. There wasn't one. And you said, no, sure. And sure enough, I looked it up on the archive, found it on Google, it's hidden in the woods. And you knew about it, knew some details about it, right? Just like that. And I was just blown away. Don't tell me that you virtually are aware of all those thousands of houses you mentioned, or was that a fluke?
Unfortunately, a lot of those houses have been burned in my brain. I've been doing this so long. My wife calls me an idiot savant, mostly the idiot part. And I guess that's a little tiny piece of the savant part, is occasionally I can just produce miraculous data out of nowhere.
About your podcast, I had to dig deep. So it's about a decade running. You're almost hitting here close to the 400th episode. You must have had some fascinating people on. Are there some that stand out that you remember specifically?
Oh, we've had so many great guests. We've had about 650 guests on the show so far. Our very first show was Kelly Lynch, who is an actress in Hollywood. She owns a Lautner House and a Neutra House. And Myrick Howard, who was the longtime president of Preservation North Carolina. And, we started the show and we were wanting to do something that had not been done at that point, which was to organize a podcast for the general public. All the podcasts I could find at that time were very professionally designed, architect oriented. And as a result, they were really dreary as hell. And it's just impenetrable for somebody that doesn't know and doesn't live architecture every day. So we were trying to make it more accessible. We started the show. We ran for about 5 months. We couldn't get the sponsors that we wanted, and we closed up the shop. And then about a month later, all these end of year lists came out of what are the best podcasts of the year for architecture. And we were on like 4 or 5 lists. Like, what? So we got the band back together and opened it up and have been running ever since.
Talking about the band, you are called Mr. Modernist. It started with you, but it has morphed into something much bigger than one person can handle, I'm sure. Who is behind all of this at this point?
So the real engine of the podcast is my co-host and engineer, Tom Gild, who was one of the top radio DJs in North Carolina in the 80s and 90s. He had a studio in Raleigh that we still record a lot of the interviews from. And he does all the editing. He does the voiceover work. He travels with me to Palm Springs. We do interviews out there. Without him, we could have never done this. And then on our organization staff, we've had any number of people over the years. Our volunteers are really our heart and soul. A number of them have been with us for like 10, 12, 14 years and turning out so much information. One woman has probably on her own found about 4,000 houses across the United States. She tells me that she's hopelessly addicted and cannot stop. So we're happy for her.
Palm Springs, so you mentioned the tours you take. Can you take us along that a little bit and tell us how they look like? How often do you do these and what kind of people are joining you?
Sure. So we do all kinds of trips and tours during the year. We do them in the Raleigh, North Carolina area. We take people to Europe every May. We take people to Palm Springs, California every February. And we do other destinations on and off during the year. 90% of the people on these trips and tours are not architects. They're just fans. They're just people that love this stuff, and it's their 9th or 10th priority in life. It's not 1, 2, or 3 like you, Toby, because you're living it, but it's 9, 10, or 11, and they want to do something that is informative and educational, but also a lot of fun. So one of the secrets that we found in building this archive and these experiences is just to make it fun all the time. It's got to be something that's super enjoyable.
You also mentioned earlier that part of the archive is a collection of architectural magazines. I was blown away when I discovered that. What's happening there? You're actually scanning in all of these magazines. Can you tell us a little bit more what you have there?
So this all got started in 2013 in Charlotte when I got a call from a real estate agent who was standing in the basement of an architect's house. He had died, and he had worked in his career for another architect who had also died. And so there were 26 boxes of old, moldy, wet magazines in the basement. And he calls and says, "We're going to throw this stuff away. Do you want it?" And I was thinking, oh, well, what the hell? So I got on Craigslist and hired one of those guys that'll pick up anything, anywhere, sent his truck down to Charlotte. He brought all the boxes back. And it turned out really only one box was damaged, beyond use. The rest of them were filled with magazines from the 40s and 50s and 60s. So over the course of the next couple of months, we bought some old scanners off of eBay, took the magazines to FedEx office and sheared off the bindings, and sheet fed probably 400,000 or 500,000 pages of magazines in and put them online. And immediately people just went crazy for this because it was the only place they could get this information. Not only was it full PDF with all the text and all the photos and all the articles and all the ads, but we made it text searchable for the first time. So you could go in, type an architect, type a vendor, type an address, type an issue, whatever, and find all the citations about that. And this was great. So, we went all in on this. From that initial 500,000 pages, I think it was, we're now up to 5 million pages. We have about 150 different publications, full issues in there. We have some complete runs. For example, we have every architectural record ever published for the last 130 years. We have all of the famous progressive architecture and pencil points, which ran for about 70 years until it closed. We have all the AIA, not all, but we have most of the AIA state and city magazines, which used to exist. Most of them are gone now. And of course, the national AIA magazines. And we're still adding. We add on average about 1,000 pages a day to the archive.
That's incredible. You talking about this being maybe not on the top of everybody's list. How has your work been received by the stodgy architecture community, or the stodgy historians out there? You bring such ease and lightheartedness and fun to this all. Are you being received well by the so-called professionals, or has your relationship been with them?
Well, we love architects and we love our historians. This is a different approach. And there are a few people that it's just not serious enough for them. It's not academic enough. But the public that uses this and the people around the world that use this as a resource are over the moon about it. I get emails almost every day thanking our team for putting this together. It's ease of use. It never breaks. It's never down. It's constantly updated. And that just is, I'm very grateful for all the huge outpouring of support for this. And of course, we are keeping track of the projects of all the different architects and giving them promotion, which they really like. Architecture students do not receive 1 minute of training in sales and marketing in their academic programs. and they need it, particularly if they're a small practice. So indirectly, we help a lot of people get new commissions, particularly when people go on our tours and see some of the homes close up of various architects around the state and the country and want to engage those professionals.
Not only that, you also have had the Matsumoto Prize for several years, in which you highlight the work of contemporary modern architects and their work. You bring them into the fold through that and provide them great sort of recognition with it. It has become the architectural prize for modern residential architecture in North Carolina. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Plus, Matsumoto is an interesting as a name, of recognition here in North Carolina. The Raleigh area in general has been probably a hotbed for mid-century modern architecture because of Matsumoto and other people 50 years ago
Well,
or so.
North Carolina has so many houses, 5,000, because of NC State's architecture program, which started up in 1948. They hired a hotshot dean from Oklahoma to come in and ramp up the program, and he was wildly successful. And one of the professors he brought in was George Matsumoto, who lived here for quite a while and generated some of the most prized small houses still in the state. So in 2012, we wanted to start a competition for new modernist houses to continue the mid-century modern tradition that George Matsumoto and others had started. Since then, we've had hundreds of entries into these and have exposed the public more and more and more that their dreams really are accessible. There's a myth that modernist architecture has to be expensive, and it doesn't. It can be. I mean, you can bling out these houses all day and spend millions of dollars on them. But the basic principle of modernist architecture is its simplicity and its ability to bring inspiring shelter, which can be on a lower cost basis to anybody that wants it. So over time, the houses that tend to win the Matsumoto Prize tend to not be the biggest ones or the most elaborately detailed, but the ones that you can look at or go in and go, wow, I'd like to live here.
You're such an engaging speaker. Thank you for bringing this to the podcast here. But you also take your dog and pony show around the nation. I've witnessed your talk once too. Forgive me, the accidental architect? No, archivist. Is that right?
Archivist, yes. I'm
Um,
also an accidental architect by extension a little bit, but
well, do tell us about both of those things then.
sure. So I was very honored a number of years ago to get honorary designation by the National AIA, which I'm very proud of. It doesn't get me anything. I think I get a free magazine subscription out of the whole deal, but it was I'm very grateful to be included in that group. I have no training in architecture. I'm not an architect. I only get it genetically because of my dad and that influence. I'm also not formally in library science, or I'm not an archivist by training. I've just started this all up, and I'm happy to find myself leading this organization in a way that is inspiring others to do projects. We get inquiries all the time from people that have seen the websites and want to do something like this on their own, say for their community, their town, maybe their state, maybe a foreign country. So in my talk that I give around the US, I share the story of modernism, how it came about, what it is, why it's important. I talk about how just, mere mortals, average citizens, non-architects can get involved and they can work to preserve the great modernist houses in their community. And then I share the story about how our organization started and how people can join us and continue that effort.
Speaking of which, what do you think lies in the future for NC Modernist, for US Modernist? Where is this all going in your estimation? And
Well, like any archive, it will continue to exist online and improve and get better. We're looking into ways to get AI to help us with search capabilities, particularly, so that instead of just asking for a keyword, you could ask it to go in and build you a report about something. Say you wanted to know about what's in a neighborhood, and you'd want the AI to go in and pull out all the houses from a particular neighborhood and write a little narrative about each one. That was unthinkable a few years ago, and now is very much within the realm of possibility.
That is so cool. You keep the modern in the modernist with all of your work right there. Say you, I have to ask you, with all of these houses that you have seen, there must be one or two that sort of stand out for you personally.
Well, yes. I tend to favor the houses that hit the sweet spot of between about 1,800 and 2,400 square feet. So enough for 2 to 4 people to live in very comfortably. It all depends on the scale and the structure and the space and how it's put together. One of the questions I get asked all the time by people is, why should I hire an architect? Like, I can just go buy a house off the rack and save all that money from the architecture fees. And my answer always is that an architect is trained to know a lot more about houses than you do. That's their job. So, you wouldn't go out and replace all the plumbing in your house by yourself. You'd hire a plumber. When people are looking to have a new home, if they hire an architect, most of the time that architect is going to be able to make efficiencies in that house that the client can't even really conceive of because they just don't know the science. And the practical example is, let's say that you have a house and you've decided you want 3,000 square feet of house because you've watched too much HGTV and you've just, you've talked to all your friends and that's the number and you're solid on that number and you've looked up what the cost of square footage is and it's a big number there. Well, if you hire an architect, you're going to pay them some sort of fee to do the house. It might be 10%, 12%, 15%, somewhere in that range. But that architect can also give you a house that is maybe 2,400 square feet that lives like it's 3,000. So you're actually going to save money by hiring the architect than if you just let some builder go loose and build those 3,000 square feet. And the house that you get is going to be completely customized to you and your life and your family and your hobbies and whatever it is you want to do with yourself.
Well, George, drop the mic. We have to end the interview right here. That's absolutely amazing. Thank you for all of that. But of course, I have to ask you a couple more questions. So you experienced this yourself, I understand. You live yourself in a modern home. Can you share us a little bit about that experience and
Sure.
how you live in your home these days?
So when I started this project in 2007, I went to see Falling Water, Frank Lloyd Wright's masterpiece in Pennsylvania, which everyone should go to. It is the ultimate pilgrimage for modernist fans. And the thing about Falling Water is that there's no video or 3D rendering or photo that can do the justice of just being there. You walk through this house and its amazing twists and turns and spaces and just go, this is incredible. So it's about an hour and a half outside of Pittsburgh. We drove back to Pittsburgh, got on a plane, came home, got home like 5 or 6 o'clock, and this was in my head. This house is just like completely in my head. I said, I'm gonna design a house for myself. So I did what any rational person would do at 8:30 at night, 30 minutes before closing. I drove out to Michael's, the craft store, and bought sheets and sheets of styrofoam, an X-Acto knife, and some pins. And I stayed up all night, like Richard Dreyfuss in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and built a model out of styrofoam, a really clunky model, a model that would get an F in architecture school. And lo and behold, by 2 or 3 in the morning, I had this nice model of a house. And so I started shopping it with other architects. I would make an appointment to go talk to them about a new house, and I would come into the appointment holding my model. And the architects would look at me like, George, this is not how architecture works. We're supposed to make the model for you.
That is so good though. But you eventually found somebody who played along with you, picked up the model
Yes.
and took it further?
Eventually, we went with a design build firm at the time called Tonic. which is now called Catherine Hogan Architects. They designed and built the house in 2010. And now, 14 years later, we're still here and love it and don't plan to move.
Wonderful. I have one more question for you. We covered so much ground here in such an entertaining way. You're a master at this. But is there anything that we haven't covered yet that you would really like to share with the listeners?
Well, I think we should talk a little bit about the Charlotte Concord area.
Okay.
So your area was really the number 2 in North Carolina for architecture and has caught up a lot in recent years because of the architecture school at UNC Charlotte, which has now been there, I think, for 45 years, 50 years, somewhere in that
A little above
range.
50. Yeah, 52
About
or
50, yeah. A lot of the graduates of that have gone on to do some wonderful buildings around the country. But back in the day, it was really just a few people. Odell was the main firm in Charlotte. They designed the first Charlotte Coliseum and a lot of classic modernist houses for other clients. We have all the Charlotte houses on our NC Modernist website. And now Charlotte and its continual expansion, it's always ahead of Raleigh in terms of, its infrastructure. I mean, you guys got light rail and you've had that for years. And I don't know how long it's going to take for us to get even our first bus route kind of thing like that. You guys have a fabulous international airport. We're just now getting a whole bunch of international flights coming in. So Charlotte's a great area to be in. And, it's architects like you and others who are making it exciting for people who are moving to North Carolina in droves from all over the country.
Well, thank you for the shout out. I can only agree. Well, thank you, George. I really appreciate you taking the time. And I will put all the links about the websites you mentioned and everything else on the show notes.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Toby.
There you have it, George Smart, Mr. Modernism himself on all things mid-century modern. You can find out more about George at ncmodernist.org and usmodernist.org. I'm your host, Toby Witte, author of Supersizing Bliss, How We Have Betrayed Our Homes and the Happiness We Seek. Please go to supersizingbliss.com to order a copy of my book and find more information. When I don't talk to you, I design sexy, modern, sustainable homes in North and South Carolina and adjacent areas. Subscribe, leave a comment, and click on the links in the show notes.